important and helpful information you're sharing with us here today. I represent a very diverse district. I've got congested cities, and I've got rural areas as well, and everything in between. And so I think one of the important things is to deal with some of these issues about equity. Equity for, my kids don't want to drive a car. They use ride-sharing apps and they live in cities. But in my district, the people who need to upskill and get community college can't afford a car, and they can't get there because we've cut the local bus service. I've got veterans in the northwest corner of my district who are 30 miles from their doctor's appointments. So we have to be looking at systems, and I think talking about these systems not as a Silicon Valley fun to have, but as a need to have, to allow Americans who are aging like my mother, who can't be driving a car and shouldn't be driving a car, to get where she needs to go and not be locked in, but also for our veterans to get to appointments. And so part of that, I think, needs to be talking about it differently. When Model Ts came out, and I met a veteran recently, he told me he'd saved up $25, earning 25 cents an hour to buy his first car, and it was a Model T. We have people alive in this country who embraced that, and it displaced all of the buggy makers and all of the people who were shoeing horses, and America made that decision. Clearly this is coming, but we need to figure out how to be responsible, and it is going to be a long transition. So hearing from you and getting feedback as we go about how do we train the workforce that's going to be displaced. How do we make sure the public has confidence that they can do this and not get run over? But this we did face with cars. When cars first came in, we're sharing the road with horses. And I think we need to go back and look a little bit at that history and learn how did those transitions happen? What made them happen well? How did they deal with people who did get killed by getting run over by cars? How did America make that transition at that point? But I really would like to drill down a little bit on this question about how we make these technologies accessible to the people who don't have means, for whom it's not a nice to have. It's the people who actually, they need this to conduct their daily lives. They need this to participate in American democracy. They need this to get to their job. They need this to get to work. They need this to get to their doctors. And how long are we going to have to subsidize? Because that's part of it. People don't want to pay the subsidies, but otherwise Americans are going to left behind. So I know, Ms. Castillo, you talked about, Norwalk, Connecticut is doing this, not my district, and Mr. Bott, how do we do this to make sure it's available to all Americans?
I have answered a lot, so I will let Ms. Castillo have some time here. I think mobility represents freedom. And for so many Americans, I think we view this as would I like to buy a new car that might have this cool self-driving feature? And for parents with teenagers, they probably don't want their kids driving. And for parents with parents, they may have issues with parents aging out of driving. And so there are tens of millions of Americans for whom this is not a cool technology issue. It represents a transformative chance for us to go out and connect them with jobs and hospitals and their loved ones in a way that we haven't been able to. So ITS America is incredibly passionate about making sure that our members are talking about that because, again, mobility is freedom.
Thank you. That is a great question. I think this is a great start to have conversations, especially bringing rural America into the discussions for technology. Oftentimes we are left out of those discussions because people think that people that live in the most rural areas don't necessarily need, because we're not facing congestion and all of that, but they still have a lot of issues and they still have a daily life to live and they need to get there. With autonomous vehicles, I think one of the things in rural America that we also need to talk about is the majority of the drivers that drive in our service areas are older. They've already retired. They left their career. This is a second, career for them, and so they're in their 70s and their 80s, and that is changing as people change. That generation is changing, and so all of that generation that doesn't want to just sit around and, they want to serve and they want to help. Not that there's not people that want to do that, but that is changing. And so we're looking at driver shortages. And so we also have to look at how can we manage that. And I know that the people that in the more rural areas, they do like to have somebody on there. Our drivers know these people by name. They do that. There's nothing to say that we couldn't still give that same type of service on an autonomous vehicle. But we have to look at something because drivers is definitely going to be an issue. And I'm talking probably within the next 5 years, not 20 years. So I think we just need to continue to keep the discussions going. Rural America looks different to every rural area. You can talk to some people that say rural is, like a 5,000 county and they are driving huge distances, and then some that are butted up against urban areas, but they're still rural because they still can't get into the urban areas. So we just have to keep the discussions going. Thank you.
Chairman Graves, Representative Esty. I look at that question's a great question, but more about the question, a great point is raised. What we see in this technology is about giving folks historically that haven't had access now the opportunity to have access and to do it in a sustainable manner. If we look at public transit today, in Ohio, we've lost 16% of our public transit ridership since 2011. A lot of that is Uber, Lyft, but also is a lot of it transit agencies pulling back routes. And what that is, and what we see with this technology, first last mile options here, whether it's sending these shuttles, we're all testing, and by the way, we're getting ready to test our first one in Columbus, Ohio in 60 days. But we're looking at different use cases with these shuttles all around the country. And it offers an efficient way to start giving folks who haven't had access to health care, jobs, entertainment. Think about the aging population, what this technology can offer. I was there when my father took the keys away from his father, and we may not have to do that tomorrow. And truly, access is very proportional to longevity, and that's, again, where we see this technology. We also, we have a workforce corridor project where there's a challenge now with companies getting able bodies to their jobs. And now we're seeing, as we talk about public-private partnerships, we're seeing a more proactive role by the private sector in transportation. And that's the reason being. So we're studying between Cincinnati and Dayton. There's a lot of logistic companies between the two cities, and we're working with them, working with even private rideshare companies about how we can best get people to jobs. So the question was great, the point is great, but this technology offers probably more promise in giving folks access than we've seen, at least in my generation.
Chairman Graves, Representative Esty, let me add a little bit to that. So